She towed my car. I brought home a tank legally. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served on 50 tons of American steel with a working turret. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm about to tell you how a power-hungry HOA Karen tried to destroy my life and how I used every lesson from 22 years of military service to dismantle her empire without breaking a single law. Within 60 days, she'd lose everything. Her power, her position, her reputation. The community would vote her out unanimously. And it would all be completely legal. But before we get to the part where I parked a fully operational tank in my driveway, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. It was a Tuesday morning in April when I woke up to find my driveway empty. Not just empty, but violently empty. The kind of empty that makes your stomach drop because you know something's gone horribly wrong. My midnight blue 1970 Chevelle, the car my old man and I spent 3 years restoring before he passed, was gone. No note. No warning. Just tire marks on the concrete and a sick feeling in my gut. I stood there in my pajama pants and Marine's hoodie coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, staring at the empty space where $60,000 worth of automotive history and family memories should been. The morning sun was just starting to hit the asphalt, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked. Birds chirping. Sprinklers running on automatic timers. The whole American dream package. Except someone had just stolen my car. I pulled out my phone ready to call the police when I noticed something tucked under my doormat. A bright orange violation notice from the Meadowbrook Springs Homeowners Association. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. The citation claimed my vehicle was in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, something about commercial or project vehicles not being allowed in visible areas, including driveways. Commercial vehicle? My Chevelle, the fully restored classic that I drove maybe twice a month to car shows and veteran meetups. But here's the kicker. At the bottom of the form, in neat handwriting, someone had added that my vehicle had been towed at my expense and I'd need to pay a $300 fine plus $50 per day in storage fees before I could get it back. Oh, and I'd also need to provide written proof that the vehicle would be stored off-site permanently. My vision went red. Not the angry red you get from a bad day at work. The cold, calculated red that I'd learned to recognize during my time in the service. Let me give you some context here because it's important for understanding what happened next. I'd spent 22 years in the Marine Corps working my way up to Master Sergeant. I did 3 tours in Iraq, earned a Bronze Star for Valor, and spent the last 8 years of my service commanding a mechanized unit where every decision could mean the difference between bringing everyone home or writing letters to families. The military had taught me something crucial about conflict. Strategy always beats emotion. Always. The best battles, the ones you actually win, are the ones you've already won before the first shot is fired. You gather intelligence, you identify weaknesses, you prepare overwhelming force, and then you execute with precision. I was about to prove that lesson all over again. But first, I had to figure out who was responsible for this disaster. I threw on some clothes and marched straight to the HOA office, which was located in a converted house at the entrance of our neighborhood. Meadowbrook Springs was one of those planned communities that look perfect in the brochures. Manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, houses in pre-approved color palettes. The kind of place where every street name sounds like it was generated by a suburban random word generator. Willow Creek Drive, Maple Ridge Court, Oak Haven Lane. You get the idea. The HOA president's office was on the 2nd floor. Her name was Carolyn Thatcher, and she ruled Meadowbrook Springs like a feudal lord ruling peasants. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was heading to a country club that wouldn't actually accept her with that particular haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager," from 3 blocks away. I'd met her exactly once before at the mandatory new homeowner orientation 6 months earlier. She'd spent 90 minutes explaining the rules with the enthusiasm of someone reading a tax code. Grass height no taller than 3 inches. Holiday decorations only during approved periods. Garbage cans must be stored out of sight, except on collection days. I'd tune most of it out. Big mistake. When I walked into her office that morning, Carolyn was sitting behind an oversized desk, typing on her computer with the kind of aggressive finger stabbing that suggested she was either very busy or wanted you to think she was. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah, someone towed my car from my own driveway last night," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'd like to know why." She finally looked at me, and I swear there was already a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew exactly who I was and why I was there. "Mr. Morrison, is it—" She made a show of shuffling through papers on her desk. Yeah, 17 Willow Creek Drive. Your vehicle was in violation of HOA bylaws. It's all explained in the citation that was left at your residence." "That car isn't a commercial vehicle," I said. "It's a classic. A collectible. It's worth more than half the cars in this neighborhood." Carolyn folded her hands on her desk with exaggerated patience, like a kindergarten teacher explaining why we don't eat paste. "Mr. Morrison, the vehicle in question appeared to be in various states of disrepair," she began. "It's a restoration project." "Was a restoration project?" "It's completely finished." She continued as if I hadn't spoken. "And regardless of its status, the HOA board has determined it doesn't meet the aesthetic standards of our community." I felt my jaw tightening. "Where's my car? It's being held at Precision Towing on Industrial Boulevard. You'll need to pay the violation fine and all associated towing and storage fees before retrieval. Additionally, you'll need to provide written proof that the vehicle will be stored off-site permanently." "That's my property," I said slowly. "You can't just take someone's property from their own driveway." Carolyn's smile widened, and that's when I saw it. The naked power trip. This wasn't about rules or community standards. This was about control. "Actually, Mr. Morrison, when you purchased your home in Meadowbrook Springs, you signed the HOA agreement. That agreement gives the board authority to enforce community standards, including the removal of code violations. You'll find everything is completely legal." She said that last word, legal, with such satisfaction that I wanted to flip her desk over. But I didn't. Because flipping desks is what amateurs do. Professionals gather intelligence first. "I want to see the specific bylaw," I said. Carolyn's smile faltered for just a second. "Just long enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve." "It's all in the HOA handbook you received at orientation," she said. "I want to see it now." She sighed dramatically, turned to her computer, and pulled up a document. She spun the monitor around so I could see it, but didn't offer to print it or send it to me. The paragraph she pointed to was vague at best, something about vehicles used for commercial purposes or in states of disrepair. "My car doesn't fit either category," I said. "The board has interpreted it as such." "The board or you?" Her expression hardened. "I am the president of this board, and I have the authority to make enforcement decisions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. The fine is $300 plus towing and storage. I suggest you handle it quickly before the daily storage fees become unmanageable." I stood there for a long moment, and I could see her getting uncomfortable. She'd probably expected me to explode, to make threats, to give her ammunition to paint me as an aggressive troublemaker. Instead, I just nodded slowly. "I'll be handling this," I said quietly. "Have a good day, ma'am." I walked out of that office, and I kid you not, my hands were steady as surgical instruments. That's when I knew she'd made a critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. She thought I was just another homeowner she could bully into submission. She had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 22 years studying exactly that. Over the next week, I paid what amounted to ransom money to get my Chevelle back. $650 total, including towing fees and storage. I smiled when I handed over the check. I was polite. I asked Carolyn how her day was going. She looked confused by my attitude. She'd probably expected anger, maybe legal threats. Instead, I treated her like a customer service representative helping me with a minor inconvenience. But while I was being Mr. Nice Guy on the surface, underneath, I was doing what Marines do best. Reconnaissance. I started with the HOA bylaws themselves. Not the summary pamphlet they give you at orientation, but the actual legal documents filed with the county. All 47 pages of dense legal language that 99% of homeowners never bother to read. I read every single word. Twice. Then I started researching Carolyn Thatcher, public records, court documents, social media, property records. I wasn't looking for anything illegal, not yet anyway. I was looking for patterns. What I found was illuminating. Carolyn had been HOA president for 7 years. During that time, she'd issued over 300 violation notices. 300. In a neighborhood of just 212 homes. She'd initiated foreclosure proceedings against 4 families for unpaid fines. She'd filed restraining orders against 2 homeowners who challenged her authority. She'd even convinced the board to hire her husband's company for all HOA landscaping maintenance at rates 30% higher than competitors. But here's what really caught my attention. In the past 3 years, 17 families had sold their homes and moved out of Meadowbrook Springs. That's an 8% turnover rate in a neighborhood where the average homeowner was supposed to stay for 15 years. I started knocking on doors. The first person I talked to was Roger Bennett, a retired firefighter who lived 3 houses down from me. He'd been in Meadowbrook Springs for 12 years and had watched Carolyn's reign of terror evolve. She started out reasonable, Roger told me over coffee in his kitchen. His wife Linda was there too, nodding along. First couple of years, she was just enforcing basic stuff. Keep your lawn mowed, don't leave trash cans out. Normal HOA stuff. But then something changed. What changed? I asked. Roger and Linda exchanged a look. Her husband lost his job, Linda said quietly. Engineering firm downsized. This was about 5 years ago. Suddenly, Carolyn became obsessed with finding violations. Everything was a problem. Christmas lights up one day too late, fine. Mailbox slightly faded, fine. Someone parks on the street overnight because their garage is full towed. She's on a power trip, Roger added. But it's more than that. I think she needs the money. The fines go into the HO general fund, but guess who controls that fund and guess whose husband gets all the maintenance contracts? This was getting interesting. Has anyone tried to remove her from the board? I asked. Roger laughed bitterly. Good luck with that. You need a majority vote of homeowners to call a special election. She's got enough people scared that they won't sign the petition. Plus, she's got 2 other board members who vote however she tells them to. Who are the board members? Margaret Chen and David Paulson. Margaret's terrified of Carolyn because she's gotten 3 violation notices herself. David just doesn't care. He's never at the meetings. I made mental notes of everything. This wasn't just about my car anymore. This was about a systematic abuse of power that had been going on for years. Over the next 2 weeks, I talked to 37 different homeowners. 23 of them had stories about Carolyn. Unreasonable fines, harassment, threats of legal action. One elderly woman named Dorothy Martinez had been fined $2,000 for having a vegetable garden that Carolyn claimed violated the aesthetic standards of the community. Dorothy had paid it because she was scared of losing her home. Another family, the Johnsons, had received a violation notice because their son's wheelchair ramp was not in keeping with neighborhood architecture. They'd provided a doctor's note proving medical necessity, and Carolyn had still tried to fine them. But here's the thing that nobody seemed to realize. HOAs are bound by the same laws as everyone else. They can't discriminate. They can't selectively enforce rules. They can't fine you for violations that aren't clearly defined in the bylaws. And they definitely can't use their position to funnel money into their own pockets. Every single conversation I had was documented. I took notes, I recorded dates, I gathered copies of violation notices. I was building a case, and I wasn't rushing it. Meanwhile, Carolyn wasn't done with me. 2 weeks after I got my Chevelle back, I received another violation notice. This time it was for my lawn being excessively high. I went outside with a tape measure. My grass was exactly 2.7 inches tall. The bylaws specified no taller than 3 inches. I took photos with timestamps and measurements clearly visible. 3 days later, another notice arrived. My house numbers were faded and unprofessional. I'd literally just had them professionally repainted 6 months ago as part of my move in maintenance. More photos. More documentation. Then came the big one. A $500 fine for unauthorized modifications to property exterior. The violation? I'd installed a small flagpole in my front yard. A 3-foot-tall flagpole where I flew an American flag and on special occasions, the Marine Corps flag. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, but it's a beautiful piece of legislation. It explicitly states that HOAs cannot prohibit homeowners from displaying the United States flag. They can impose reasonable restrictions on size and placement, but they cannot ban it. My flagpole was well within reasonable restrictions. 3 feet tall, positioned in the front yard flowerbed flag, no larger than 3 feet by 5 feet. When I went to Carolyn's office to dispute the fine, she was ready for me. The bylaw clearly states no structures can be added to the property without prior board approval, she said, not even looking up from her paperwork. It's a flagpole, I said calmly, for an American flag. Structure is structure, Mr. Morrison. The Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act supersedes HOA bylaws. She finally looked at me and there was something ugly in her expression. Something that made my combat instincts start tingling. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Morrison? No, ma'am. Then I suggest you stop trying to interpret the law and start following the rules of this community. The fine stands. You have 30 days to remove the flagpole or face additional penalties. I leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just present. That flag represents 22 years of my life, I said quietly. 3 combat tours. Friends who didn't make it home. You're telling me I can't honor them in my own yard for just a second, just a flicker? I thought I saw something like shame cross her face. But it was gone, instantly replaced by cold authority. This isn't about patriotism, Mr. Morrison. This is about property values and community standards. The flag stays down or you pay the fine. Those are your options. I stood up slowly. I'll take option 3. There is no option 3. I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. There's always an option 3, ma'am. I learned that in the Marines. I walked out and I could feel her staring at my back. She thought I was going to lawyer up, probably. Start some long legal battle that would cost me thousands and ultimately end in a settlement where I removed the flagpole and she quietly rescinded some fines. She was thinking too small. I spent the next month doing something I'd gotten very good at during my military career. Logistics planning. Not for moving troops or equipment, though. For moving something much larger. You see, when I retired from the Marines, I'd started a small business with 2 of my old unit buddies. We called it Iron Horse Logistics, and we specialized in transporting oversized equipment. Industrial machinery, construction vehicles, that sort of thing. We had the permits, the insurance, the heavy-duty trailers. We knew every regulation about what could be moved, where, and when. And I'd been thinking about a particular item that had been sitting in a military surplus yard for the past 8 months. An M60 Patton tank. Now I know what you're thinking. This is insane. This can't be legal. Let me stop you right there. I spent 2 full weeks consulting with 3 different lawyers. Real estate law, municipal code, and federal surplus regulations. I contacted the county zoning office. I spoke with the fire marshal. I even called my old commanding officer who now works in military surplus acquisition. Every single one confirmed the same thing. As long as the weapon system is permanently disabled, the vehicle is properly registered, and I have all the transport permits. It's just property. Weird property, but legal property. The county clerk literally laughed and said, "Sir, if someone can park a 30-foot RV in their driveway, I can't tell them they can't park a registered historic vehicle." I wasn't guessing. I wasn't hoping. I was building an airtight legal case on 50 tons of American steel. Let me explain something about military surplus. When the military decommissions equipment, it often ends up in private auctions. Civilians can buy tanks, armored personnel carriers, even fighter jets. as long as the weapons systems are disabled and they follow the proper registration procedures. The M60 patent in question was a Vietnam-era tank that had been used for training purposes for decades before being retired. The main gun had been deactivated and the turret locked in place. It was essentially a 50-ton steel sculpture with a working engine. Completely legal to own, just like owning a classic car. Only much, much bigger. I'd been eyeing this particular tank for a while, thinking maybe I'd buy it as a restoration project somewhere down the line. Something to work on in my retirement years. But Carolyn's harassment had given me a better idea. I made some calls. The tank was still available. $28,000, which was actually reasonable for a piece of military history in decent condition. I could transport it myself with my company's equipment. And most importantly, there was absolutely nothing in the Meadowbrook Springs HOA bylaws about parking a tank in your driveway. I know what you're thinking. This is crazy. This is overkill. This is the kind of thing that gets you sued or arrested or committed to a mental institution. But here's the thing. I'd read every single page of those bylaws. Multiple times. They specified restrictions on commercial vehicles, recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, project cars. They even had a clause about vehicles in states of disrepair. Not one single word about armored military vehicles. And here's the beautiful part. A properly registered and maintained tank is just a vehicle. Weird, absolutely. Illegal, not even close. As long as it was street legal, which required specific permits and modifications, all of which I was fully capable of obtaining, I could park it anywhere I could park a car. But I wasn't ready to pull that trigger yet. Pun intended. First, I needed to build my case against Carolyn. Because this wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure she couldn't do this to anyone else. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board requesting a hearing to dispute my fines. According to the bylaws, the board was required to hold a hearing within 30 days and allow me to present my case. They scheduled it for the absolute last day possible, typical power play, and held it at 7 in the evening on a Thursday night in the HOA office conference room. I showed up 15 minutes early with 3 expanding folders full of documentation. Carolyn was already there along with Margaret Chen and David Paulson. Margaret looked nervous. David looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Morrison, Carolyn said with false sweetness, "Please have a seat." I sat down and placed my folders on the table. "I'm here to formally contest 3 violation notices and associated fines," I began. "The first regarding my lawn height, the second regarding my house numbers, and the third regarding my flagpole." "The board has reviewed your violations and finds them valid," Carolyn said immediately. "With all due respect, I haven't presented my evidence yet." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. You have 15 minutes. I opened the first folder. Inside were printed photographs with timestamps and measurements, copies of the relevant bylaws, and a notarized statement from a licensed landscaping company confirming my grass height was within regulation at the time of the violation notice. I slid copies across the table to each board member. As you can see, my lawn was measured at 2.7 inches on the date of the violation. The bylaw specifies no taller than 3 inches. This violation notice is factually incorrect. Margaret was actually looking at the documents. David was on his phone. Carolyn hadn't even touched the papers. The board member who observed the violation found it to be in excess of 3 inches, Carolyn said. Which board member? Myself. "Do you have any evidence to support that observation? Photographs, measurements?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't need to justify my observations to you. Actually, according to Section 19 of the HOA bylaws, any violation notice must be supported by documented evidence that can be reviewed during an appeals process. Would you like me to read the exact wording?" I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She hadn't expected me to actually know the bylaws better than she did. "Let's move on to your second violation," she said tightly. I opened the second folder. More photographs, more documentation. This time I had the receipt from the painting company that had done my house numbers, along with photos showing they were clearly legible and properly maintained. This violation is also factually incorrect, I said. The numbers are professionally painted, clearly visible from the street, and meet all specifications outlined in the architectural guidelines. Margaret was actually taking notes now. David had put his phone down. And finally, the flagpole. I opened the third folder, and this is where I brought out what you might call the heavy artillery. I had a copy of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. I had photographs showing my flagpole met all reasonable size and placement restrictions. I had measurements proving it was within the setback requirements from the street and property lines. And I had something else. A letter from a real estate attorney I'd consulted confirming that the HOA's attempt to fine me for displaying an American flag was not only unreasonable, but potentially illegal under federal law. I slid that letter across the table last, and I watched Carolyn's face go pale as she read it. This fine is not only unjustified, I said calmly, but issuing it may constitute a violation of federal law. I'm respectfully requesting that all 3 fines be rescinded immediately and that I receive a formal written apology for the harassment I've endured over the past 2 months. The room was silent. Margaret was staring at Carolyn. David was actually paying attention now. Carolyn's hands were shaking slightly as she set down the letter. The board will discuss this matter privately and provide you with our decision in writing within 10 business days, she said, her voice barely controlled. Thank you, I said politely. I gathered my folders and stood up. Oh, one more thing. I pulled out a final document. A formal complaint I'd filed with the Texas Real Estate Commission, which oversees HOA management companies. It outlined every violation of procedure and bylaw that Carolyn had committed, backed up by the documentation I'd gathered from 37 different homeowners. I thought you should know I've also filed this with the state, I said, placing it on the table. They'll be conducting an audit of Meadowbrook Springs HOA within the next 90 days. Standard procedure for complaints involving potential financial impropriety and selective enforcement. I let that sink in for a moment. Have a good evening, folks. I walked out of that conference room feeling better than I had in months. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because here's what most people don't understand about fighting someone like Carolyn. You can't just defend yourself. Defense is reactive. It lets them choose the battlefield. To really win, you have to go on offense. You have to make them react to you. That night, I drove to the warehouse and sat in the tank's driver's seat for the first time. The steel was cold under my hands. The controls were heavy, substantial, real. 50 tons of pure consequence. I started the engine. It roared to life like thunder rolling across a summer sky. And I smiled. 3 weeks later, I got my response from the board. They rescinded 2 of the fines, the lawn and house numbers, but upheld the flagpole violation. They claimed it wasn't about the flag itself, but about the structure being installed without prior approval. It was a face-saving compromise. They were hoping I'd take the partial victory and go away. Instead, I submitted a formal application to install a decorative outdoor structure in my front yard. The application was 37 pages long and included detailed engineering specifications, materials, lists, placement diagrams, and photos of similar structures in other properties. The structure I was applying to install a tank, I submitted it on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Mr. Morrison, this is Carolyn Thatcher. We need to discuss your application immediately. Good morning, ma'am, I said cheerfully. What seems to be the problem? You cannot park a military tank in your driveway. Why not? It's inappropriate. It's dangerous. Is there a specific bylaw that prohibits its silence on the other end? I've read the bylaws very carefully, I continued. Cover to cover, actually. Multiple times. I don't see anything that would prohibit a properly registered street-legal vehicle from being parked in a residential driveway. Do you? This is absurd. You're being deliberately difficult. No, ma'am, I'm being thorough. The same thoroughness I learned in the Marines. The same thoroughness that kept me and my men alive through 3 combat deployments. I take rules very seriously. The board will deny this application. On what grounds? On the grounds that it's clearly an attempt to mock the HOA and disrupt the community. So you're saying the board will deny a properly submitted application based on your personal feelings about my motivation, rather than on any actual bylaw violation? Another long silence. That sounds like selective enforcement, ma'am, which according to the complaint I filed with the state is already being investigated. I'd hate for you to add more evidence to that file. Are you threatening me, Mr. Morrison? No, ma'am. I'm just helping you understand the situation. You have 30 days to respond to my application per the bylaws. I'll wait to hear your decision. Have a great day. I hung up before she could respond. Now I should clarify something. I genuinely had purchased the tank at this point. $28,000 of what you might call strategic investment that I'd been saving for a new truck. For 3 weeks, that tank became my obsession. Not because I wanted to drive a military vehicle around town, but because I wanted Carolyn to understand something fundamental. When you push a Marine, we don't push back. We outmaneuver. Every night after work, I was at the warehouse. New tracks installed. Engine overhauled. Fresh paint applied. The turret was welded permanently in place per federal regulations, the main gun deactivated according to Department of Defense specifications. I installed proper lighting and signage to make it street legal. Registration paperwork filed. Transport permits obtained. Historic military vehicle classification approved. I had a 3-inch binder of documentation proving every single bolt on that tank was legal. My business partner thought I'd lost my mind. Jake, he said, one evening as we were finishing up the mechanical work, you're spending 30 grand to make a point. I looked at him, wrench still in my hand. No, I'm spending 30 grand to end a dictatorship. 1 week before the next scheduled board meeting, I had the tank transported to a secure lot 2 miles from Meadowbrook Springs. Close enough to move quickly if needed. Far enough that Carolyn had no idea what was coming. Every morning after that, I'd drive past the HOA office on my way to work and I'd think the same thing. You have no idea what's coming. The next HOA board meeting was in 2 weeks. According to multiple neighbors who'd started feeding me information, Carolyn spent that entire time trying to figure out how to deny my application without opening the HOA up to a lawsuit. She called an emergency meeting. She consulted with the HOA's lawyer. She tried to get the other board members to support a new bylaw that would retroactively ban military vehicles. But here's the thing about HOA bylaws. Changing them requires a vote of the membership. And I'd spent the past month talking to every single homeowner in Meadowbrook Springs about Carolyn's reign of terror. Dorothy Martinez with her vegetable garden. The Johnsons with their wheelchair ramp. Roger and Linda Bennett, who'd been harassed for years. 37 families with documented evidence of abuse. When Carolyn tried to call a special vote to change the bylaws, she couldn't get the required signatures to even bring it to a vote. She was trapped. The night before the board meeting where they had to formally respond to my application, I got a call from Margaret Chen. Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Chen from the HOA board. I wonder if I could speak with you confidentially. Of course, ma'am. I need you to understand something, she said, and her voice was shaking. I've been scared of Carolyn for 3 years. She's threatened me, she's fined me, she's made my life miserable. But what you've done, the way you've documented everything, the way you've followed every rule while she's broken them, it's shown me that we don't have to be afraid of her. I appreciate you telling me that. There's going to be a vote tomorrow night. David and I are going to vote to approve your tank application. We're also going to vote to remove Carolyn as president for violation of her fiduciary duties. We have enough evidence from your state complaint and from other homeowners to justify it? I was quiet for a moment processing this. I want to be very clear about something, I said finally. This was never about the tank. I don't actually want to park a tank in my driveway permanently. I want to live in a community where people follow the rules fairly and treat each other with respect. I know, Margaret said softly. But sometimes you need a tank to make that point. The next night's board meeting was standing room only. Word had spread through the neighborhood and people wanted to see what would happen. Roger and Linda were there. Dorothy Martinez. The Johnsons. Probably 70 or 80 people crammed into a conference room designed for 30. Carolyn looked like she hadn't slept in days. Margaret looked determined. David looked relieved that this was all finally coming to a head. "We're here to formally respond to Mr. Morrison's application," Carolyn began, but Margaret cut her off. "Actually, we have a different matter to address first," Margaret said, pulling out a prepared statement. "I'm making a formal motion to remove Carolyn Thatcher as HOA president effective immediately for violation of her fiduciary duties, selective enforcement of bylaws, and financial impropriety." The room exploded. People were talking, some cheering, some gasping. Carolyn's face went bright red. "You can't do that," she said. "I can, and I am," Margaret replied. "David, I have a seconded," David said immediately. "This is a coup," Carolyn said, her voice rising. This is illegal." "No," I said from my seat in the back, and everyone turned to look at me. "What's illegal is using HOA funds to pay your husband's company inflated rates for landscaping services. What's illegal is selectively enforcing bylaws to harass homeowners you don't like. What's illegal is filing false police reports against residents who challenge your authority." I stood up and walked to the front of the room, carrying one more folder. "This is a complete financial audit of Meadowbrook Springs HOA for the past 5 years," I said, placing it on the table. "Conducted by an independent accounting firm at my expense. It shows $73,000 in questionable transactions, most of them going to companies owned by you or your husband." Carolyn grabbed for the folder, but Margaret was faster. She opened it and started reading, her expression getting darker with every page. "The State Real Estate Commission will be receiving a copy of this audit tomorrow morning," I continued, "along with testimony from 37 homeowners documenting your abuse of power. You can resign now with some dignity intact, or you can wait for them to revoke your authority and possibly press criminal charges. Your choice." The room was dead silent. Everyone was watching Carolyn, waiting to see what she'd do. She sat there for a long moment, her hands clenched into fists on the table. Then slowly she stood up. "This community," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "is full of ungrateful people who don't appreciate what I've done to maintain property values and standards. I've worked tirelessly for 7 years. You've bullied people for 7 years," Roger Bennett called out from the crowd. "There's a difference." Carolyn glared at him, then looked at me. The hatred in her eyes was almost physical. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "You and your threats and your tank and your military righteousness. But you've just destroyed this community. You've turned everyone against each other." "No," I interrupted. "You did that. I just documented it." She grabbed her purse and walked out of that conference room without another word. I never saw her again. Margaret Chen was elected interim president that night with a mandate to organize a full board election within 60 days. David Paulson volunteered to oversee a complete audit of all HOA finances and contracts. And my tank application approved unanimously. But here's the twist. I never actually moved the tank into my driveway permanently. Instead, 3 weeks later, I organized a community event. Thank you, barbecue, for all the homeowners who stood up against Carolyn's tyranny. And the guest of honor, my fully restored M60 Patent tank parked in the community center parking lot for everyone to see. I let kids climb on it. I gave tours explaining the history of the vehicle and my time in service. I collected donations for a veterans charity, and at the end of the day, I loaded it back onto a trailer and took it to my company's warehouse, where it sits to this day as a reminder that sometimes the threat of overwhelming force is more effective than actually deploying it. The flagpole is still in my front yard. My Chevelle is still in my driveway. And when Carolyn's husband tried to sue the HOA for breach of contract 3 months later, claiming he was owed payment for the remainder of his landscaping agreement, I personally testified as to why his contract was fraudulent. He lost. Last I heard, the Thatchers moved out of state. The new HOA board implemented transparency measures, term limits, and a formal appeals process for violations. Property values actually went up once people weren't terrified of living there. Dorothy Martinez expanded her vegetable garden and now supplies half the neighborhood with fresh tomatoes in the summer. And me, I go to the monthly HOA meetings now. Not because I have to, but because I learned something important. Communities work when people participate, when they pay attention, when they don't let bullies go unchallenged. You don't need armor plating and a main gun to win a war. You need documentation, patience, and the willingness to follow every single rule while your opponent breaks them. That's the real power. That's how you win. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you're dealing with an HO nightmare, document everything. Every email, every violation notice, every conversation. Build your case like you're going to war, because you are. And if you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. Let's build a library of evidence. Because the Carolins of the world only win when good people stay silent. Don't stay silent. And if you need to rent a tank to make the point, well, I know a guy.